functional training, functional aesthetics, how does one go about, I guess, having somewhat the best of both worlds?
First of all, like the combining different modalities option does that, because obviously you can do aspects of bodybuilding and aspects of calisthenics and aspects of throwing a med ball, and you'll get, you know, some of everything. And bodybuilding gets a bad rap for being non-functional among the crowd, but I actually like bodybuilding a lot. Like I learned a lot of really good stuff from there. Like their highest rep ranges are really good for like building strength, endurance, and isolating does have its place. And it's not like I think a lot of people just sort of have this issue with bodybuilding. They're an easy target, but I don't think it's particularly non-functional any more so than anything else. So you can do that, but also a lot of the things that you would consider functional, like we're talking about moving in the transverse plane, which would broadly fall under the category of functional training because it doesn't happen a lot in any given strength sort of form of hobby. That actually builds up like these great obliques, and like you get all this detail down the side of your abs, incredible midsection compared to like someone who just does crunches for their abs and maybe just braces their core in heavy lifts. So actually functional training tends to be very aesthetic. Like your shoulders are nuts. The kind of like detail, like the striations and things. Like a bodybuilder would probably love to have that kind of detail on their shoulder, and you've gotten that from all the calisthenics you've done. That's like CrossFitters, and that's another whole can of worms. But when they have fantastic physiques because they're moving in, slightly less conventional ways, and they're doing heavy weights for higher repetitions and things. And
of course, yeah. So it's just a matter of doing a bit more, I guess, homework in your training. So doing the basics of bodybuilding, which would be a progressive higher volume approach with a combination of compound and isolation movements, but then to get quote unquote more functional and I guess diverse movement patterns, what I gather from your teachings, Adam, is just introducing those movement patterns that go in those different planes of movement with more complexity associated.
Yeah, just look at what's missing in your modality and like borrow some things from somewhere else that kind of plug those gaps, and you'll find it improves your sort of injury resilience, but also does benefit your physique because you're training stuff that otherwise would go untrained. So in bodybuilding, you'll do maybe as many curls as you can do, and then you'll switch to hammer curls because hammer curls are slightly easier than curls. So instead of dropping the weight, which is called a drop set, and that's normally how you go past failure, you instead switch the actual mechanics, the way you're doing the movement. A calisthenics example might be to do push-ups and then push-ups on your knees, so that you can use a mechanical drop set outside of a kind of just weights setting.
Just say you're training your core and you're doing hanging leg raises. You've done as many as you can with straight legs, and instead of just doing straight sets as your way of progressing that, you could do your straight leg ones until your form starts to break down, and then you tuck your knees. So you've decreased the lever arm, and you're still training that same movement pattern, but you're doing a drop set.
That sort of training is surprisingly good for hypertrophy if that's an interest of yours. You just got to build up to it and be careful with it.
I think the problem with fitness at large is we tend to use really extreme examples. So it's like you shouldn't load your back while you're bending over because it's dangerous, because it's bad for your spine. But there's a difference between going for your max deadlift load with a flex spine and
100%.
Using a very manageable load that you progress over time to actually make your body robust. So
yeah, exactly. Just like the knees over toes guy who Ben Patrick, always talking about, so many people for so long advised against moving your knees past your toes. I think it's like enough people have heard now that that's actually fine, and in fact it's encouraged. But obviously you're not going to go and do a sissy squat with like 100 kilograms across that will hurt your knees. Like that's the difference, and it's moving, and that's where bands can be fantastic because they're so light. You can get a really light resistance band, and there's no risk of dropping it on yourself, like to train all kinds of positions that would normally be tricky.
How would bands be used and the application of them, and how does it transfer to, say, your general movements?
Yeah, I think resistance bands are fantastic tools. Like first and foremost, just because the obvious practical benefits of them being extremely portable. Lately, I've often had a resistance band in my pocket that I can just pull out and start doing stuff wherever. But also because you can train, like most training is so gravity dependent. So that means that the force is always coming downwards, and like you can manipulate that by changing your body position. Like in calisthenics, there are horizontal pushes, same with weightlifting, but it's still not the same as standing up and pushing, where you've got to dig yourself into the ground and torque from the waist, etc. Which is what you do if you're swinging a bat or if you're throwing a punch or something. So ultimately, it's like you're kind of, particularly in weightlifting, only ever practicing picking stuff up, but that's only one expression of strength. Whereas a band, you can put behind you, you can put to one side, you can pull down. And whilst, you can get into a big argument as to whether swinging a cables obviously being very similar to resistance bands, but with a more linear resistance. Obviously, resistance bands get harder the further they go on, which creates challenges and has its advantages. So like one of the most basic sort of things to do is to move in the transverse plane. Like, there's sagittal, frontal and transverse, but a lot of exercises are only in the sagittal plane, which is up and down, forwards and backwards. Whereas in real life, everything we do almost involves some element of rotation. Even running and walking, you rotate, you move your right shoulder at the same time as your left hip, and at the same time pulling a door open, or I always use that example on my channel, and people are like, how heavy are your doors, man?
They're pretty heavy in general.
Yeah, wrestling, throwing a punch, like I say, all these things involve twisting. My philosophy is different because some people might say, well, why do you ever need to be strong rotating if you're not? How often do you push furniture, etc.? But that's where injuries happen, isn't it? Because you adapt to your environment, and then the one day you have to pull that furniture out and you twist funny. I mean, I literally have tweaked my back doing that. So that's where you want to build yourself up. The whole point of the training is to kind of like plug the gaps of the things you're not already doing, to fortify yourself, so that when you do have to do them, you're strong. I mean, that's the point of training in terms of just a kind of like a healthy and injury prevention. But I'm also just interested in being able to throw a punch, even though I'm not aggressive and don't intend on fighting, and being able to throw a ball a long way. I just think, it's cool to be able to use your body in all these different ways.
And I can also agree with what you're saying in terms of people injuring themselves when moving, just those awkward postures that you don't usually load in everyday life. That was probably the most common thing that I saw when I was working in the clinic as a physio. Really, really capable people like that lift have, physical jobs as well, but that moving with the stress, the awkward positions, probably a lack of sleep.
You're tired. Yeah.
Just that perfect storm.
Yeah. So all these different things that you might think are unnecessary, but they're no less, in my opinion, necessary than squatting. You could argue none of it's necessary if you work a sedentary job. So
if you enjoyed that, click here for the full fitness FAQs video. Peace.